What are the most common misconceptions about disruption? And why does getting the definition right matter for government leaders? How can leaders distinguish between genuine failures and innovations that are simply ahead of their time? And what are the societal downsides of disruption that leaders need to actively manage today? I'll explore these questions and so much more with my very special guest, Professor Scott Anthony of the Tuck School of Business at Dartmouth University and author of Epic Disruptions, 11 Innovations That Shaped Our Modern World. So, Scott, I really enjoyed your recent book, Epic Disruption, 11 Innovations That Shaped Our Modern World. You selected those 11 specific innovations spanning from, gunpowder to today's Gen AI, generative AI, to tell the story of disruption per se. What criteria did you use to choose these particular innovations? And really, Scott, what patterns emerged when you studied them together?
A great way to get into the conversation. So to answer that, I have to make sure we're using the same language when we talk about disruption. So as described in the book, a disruption takes something that was complicated and expensive and makes it simple and affordable. It changes market dynamics. It drives dynamic growth. So first of all, of course, I'm looking for things that fit the pattern of disruptive innovation. That's criteria number one. Criteria number two, I'm looking for the big ones. In 1620, Sir Francis Bacon said that there had been three things in human history that changed the state and appearance of the entire world: the compass, printing press, gunpowder. Two of those three made it into the book, and I was looking for things like that, things where you could say, before, the world looked like this; after, the world looked like that. And then the last thing I would say, this isn't meant to be the top 11. This is not meant to be the definitive guide to disruptive innovation. It's meant to be a story. So I look for things that also would be interesting stories to tell, which is why Florence Nightingale and Julia Child, who I think were absolutely epic disruptors, made the cut, because in addition to that, they also just had delicious stories to tell. And as you go through those stories, we'll talk about this more, I'm sure. There's three big themes that emerge. Disruption changes the world for better and sometimes for worse. Disruption is predictably unpredictable. And disruption rewards people who are patient and persevere. And again, we'll talk about all of these as we go through our conversation.
So you mentioned earlier, as we teed this up, Scott, the getting the definition of disruption correct, and you emphasize that often when we talk about in our normal parlance, it's misused or misunderstood. I was wondering if you could delve a little deeper in highlighting what are the most common misconceptions about disruption and why getting this definition right is really important, especially for all sector leaders. But let's throw a little government in there for government leaders. Why is it important to get this definition correct?
If you ask Clay Christensen about regrets, the biggest regret he would have, aside from being dealt a very bad hand with health, that's a separate discussion, his biggest regret about his research is that he picked the word disruption to describe the phenomena he observed. And the reason he regretted that is disruption is a word that is just laden with meaning. If I say the word disruption, you probably will think about a time a trip was dictionarily disrupted because something happened with a flight delay or whatever. You think of something bad that happened in your life. And indeed, your mouth kind of curls when you say the word. So the biggest mistake people make is they think disruption is something that's a big thing that's bad. And in Christensen's research and what I talk about in the book, a disruption is a very particular form of innovation. I'll say it again. It takes things that were complicated and expensive and makes them simple and affordable, changes dynamics, and drives explosive growth. Why does that matter? Well, that particular form of innovation, when you identify it, if you're a business leader, you say, I've got something that has the potential to really go and shape a market. If you're a market incumbent, you have to be a little bit worried, because history shows you that if an entrant comes after you with something that disrupts the status quo, it's going to be really hard for you to respond, and you have to think really carefully about what you do. If you're government, there's a range of implications. Number one, you need to understand what are the disruptions that are going to reshape markets. That can affect everything from how do we think about antitrust policy to how do we think about consumer welfare. You need to think about own internal operations. What are new innovations that are coming that are going to change the way that we do our work? And you need to think about how are we going to create the conditions where we maximize the upside of disruption and we minimize the downside. And there's a lot that we can talk about in each of those branches.
I just want to talk about, making some modern parallels with historical disruption. Scott, you draw connections between the printing press and the Model T, and you compare them to, say, contemporary technologies, emerging tech like AI. I was wondering, what can organizations, from your vantage point, who are integrating or dealing with these new technologies, in particular AI, what can they learn from the shadow cast by the earlier disruptions you talk about?
Well, first of all, I want to emphasize the word you used in the last sentence, shadow. I think this is something that really emerged to me as an important thing through the research. I believe in disruption. I believe in its power to transform. I believe in its power to democratize, to allow more people to do more things that matter to them. It's net a good thing. But the more you look at the stories, the more you realize there are downsides to things. And those downsides come in many forms. So the printing press, for example, a tremendous thing that changed the world, democratized knowledge. Before the printing press, one book I read said you could fit every book that existed and put it in the back of a wagon. So that was the entire library for the world. After the printing press, there are tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, millions of books. It's really good for most people. But it wasn't good for everybody. The Catholic Church was one of the early sponsors of the printing press technology because they wanted to make sure that their religious services were all run using the exact same approach. And of course, it took 3 years to scribe a Bible. So having something produced more quickly is great. At first, it was really good, but then the Reformation, Martin Luther come along and say, we can use the same technology to essentially drive this great schism within the church and lead to all sorts of religious changes. So the Catholic Church, I think, was happy in the beginning and maybe less happy as this began to spread. The modern parallel. You've got companies right now that are really pushing for the adoption of artificial intelligence, most notably consulting companies that are advising some of their clients on how to use it, using it aggressively inside their organizations. I wonder, is it going to be a similar sort of thing where as organizations really get what AI can do, they say, you know what? We don't need these consulting companies anymore. We can rethink, we can refashion, we can do these things ourselves. Or the efficiency gains that consulting companies get actually atrophy the ability of younger consultants to develop unique knowledge, which means the talent pipeline withers. Nobody knows for sure, of course. This is still an emerging in-play technology, but history guides us to watch for the second order effect of that technology.
Now, Scott, if we can, the other aspect of your book is the mechanics of disruption. And I found this quote that I'm going to offer from your book very fascinating. You write that when disruption strikes, the right choices can often look like the wrong ones. I was hoping you could elaborate on this counterintuitive observation and provide an example that may resonate with organizational leaders and, in fact, government executives, if that could happen.
So this is one of the things that struck me so much when I was first exposed to Clay's research, this counterintuitive nature of it. So let me give an example from the book, probably Clay's favorite example, the example of steel mini mills. So in the 1960s, Bethlehem Steel, along with other steel producers, is at the top of its game. 1962, it goes and invests $4 billion in today's terms to go and open up a great big integrated mill in Burns Harbor in Indiana. And this thing is a masterpiece. These integrated mills produce the best steel in the world. They've got these finishing lines that are like a mile long, hugely capital intensive, and produce things that go into automobiles and airplanes and bridges and all sorts of other things. In the late 1960s, a company called Nucor comes up with a very different model to make steel. It's called a steel mini mill. It doesn't cost $4 billion to create a plant. It costs $4 million. They're a lot smaller. They use electric arc furnaces. They take scrap steel, they melt it, they turn it into low quality products that are used in very basic applications. But because it's a smaller footprint, they do it cheaper. Now, what Bethlehem Steel should have done is said, let's invest in the mini mill technology. Let's have a full spectrum offering where we can have integrated mills to serve our most demanding customers, mini mills to go and efficiently serve the lowest tiers of the market. That's the thing that it should have done. Those were the right choices, but they didn't look like the right choices. The right choices to Bethlehem Steel look like, let's invest in higher margin, more profitable opportunities up market. As the mini mills are beginning to nip at our heels at the lowest tiers of the market, let's get out of that market. It appears rational to do it because the attacker has a cost advantage. The problem, the technology the mini mill started with wasn't very good, but it got better and better and better. They were able to serve more and more demanding market tiers. By the time it became obvious to Bethlehem Steel and other integrated steel producers that they had missed the mark, it was too late to respond. So in that moment, the right decisions look like the wrong ones. The wrong decisions look like the right ones. This is the essence of the innovator's dilemma. Now, if you apply this to the world of government today, one of the big challenges is we have a world that is obsessed with short-term impact, that is obsessed with, are we going to get the next vote? Are we going to have our citizens happy in the next day, week, month? In that kind of situation, it is really hard for us to step back and say, what actually are the right decisions to make that will create the kind of economy, the kind of society that we want for the long term? It requires us looking differently at things, recognizing things that look inferior, things that look not very good today will be in the mainstream tomorrow. It requires really having long-term orientation in a short-term obsessed world. That's not an easy thing to do.
Scott, one of your previous books was Dual Transformation. I was wondering, how does the framework from that book and that research complement what you've learned from writing Epic Disruptions, and in particular around managing core operations and transformational change?
I'm glad you got that question in because as you asked me the last question, I was debating, am I going to go Toyota or am I going to go back to dual transformation? So you've now allowed me to do both. So that is great. You know, the core idea in dual transformation is pretty simple. Disruption is coming. You have to transform, fundamental change in state or substance. And if you're going to do that, if you're in an organization, it's not a one-shot deal, it's a two-shot deal, hence the dual in the title, which means you have to reinvent today to adapt to the disruptive change, and you have to create tomorrow. And that's really the essence of what modern leadership is. So the book, to me, reinforced what disruption is, showed me in starker contrast both the power of it and some of the downsides to it, helped to further refine the patterns that make it predictably unpredictable, and showcased again how it requires patience. That then reinforces how you go and drive dual transformation. Dual transformation is about understanding and responding to disruptive change. Epic Disruptions gives you the tools, the mindset, the approaches, and sometimes the stories and confidence to be able to go and do it.
This has been a special edition of the Business of Government Hour, a conversation with authors, with Professor Scott Anthony of the Tuck School of Business at Dartmouth University and author of Epic Disruptions, 11 Innovations That Shaped Our Modern World. Be sure to join us next time for another informative, insightful, and in-depth conversation on improving government leadership and its effectiveness. Until then, subscribe, download, and listen to the entire interview at Apple Podcast, Spotify, Audible, or on your favorite podcast app, and as always at businessofgovernment.org.